Hello, Mage fans. Welcome to Mage the Podcast that works hard towards Ascension so you don't have to. I'm your host, Adam Simpson. I'm joined today by Terry Robinson. We're going to talk about the Book of Mirrors in another episode of Tomes of Magic. Before we get this kicked off, Terry, how are you doing?
I am okay. I tried running a RPG on Skype for the first time yesterday, and it went okay. I just assumed that there would be connectivity issues and people would be dealing with not being able to get their microphones to work, and it would be impossible to track things, and it would be hard to show stuff at the table. And I understand that there are probably better tools for doing this, but you and I use Skype for interviews. We use Skype when we do our group interviews. It's free. Everyone has it. It's baked into Windows at this point. And we just used Skype, and I was surprised how well it worked. The thing I didn't anticipate was how much space it was going to take up, because just in case I was sitting at my computer desk and I still had all the players' character sheets like arrayed out around me and all of my reference books laid out around me. So it looked like that scene in a movie where like a person is in a library trying to fit the pieces together to figure out that a person's name is actually a cipher. And if they consult like a New York Times recipe book from 1972, they'll find out the secret location of the killer. It was like that, but for an RPG. And Windows has a little snipping tool where you can just kind of grab elements of the screen, and I was copy pasting and just throwing things out to the group like that. And it also made it easy to do side channels. Like if I needed to give a player a bit of hidden information, I could literally just text it to him. So I'm going to say it was okay. We described it as being like the Snackwells of RPGs. So Snackwells was or is this company in the United States that tried to do low-fat versions of treats like cakes and so on, and you have it and you're like, man, this kind of tastes like the idea of Devil's Food Cake, but without the trans fats. It just doesn't quite stick the landing. And this felt like that, where you're like, oh yeah, it has most of the flavor that I'm used to, but it's not quite there. So it's entirely possible, and I was surprised at how easy it went. So a revelation to all those people out there who have probably been doing this for like nigh on 2 decades, and I just decided in 2020 to jump on the internet can allow us to communicate train.
You can game online. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. No, there's a lot of great opportunities that open up there. So did you use one of those online web game master tools to like run the game? No, you just used Skype and ran with it.
Just use Skype. The funny part was, despite the fact that I was sitting at my computer and I think I had 11 PDFs open and 4 web pages open. One, Google, if you just type 2D10 into Google, will roll 2 10-sided dice for you. And it has little animations and everything. And despite the fact that I was literally sitting at my computer, I still wrote down all my notes on a piece of paper. I was still jotting things down on paper. And at one point, the players was like, what's Terry doing? I can't hear his very loud keyboard clicking. I'm a fan of mechanical keyboards. The louder and more like a library in the 1990s, the better. But still took my notes by hand.
I think a lot of people make a lot of hype over these web online run your game kind of solutions. And in my experience, it's like, are you playing D&D and Pathfinder? We got your back. And it's like, well, no, actually, I'm playing something else. It's like, well, we kind of, sort of support those too. It's like, yeah, right. I've seen your support. It's not impressing me. Yeah, just grab Skype and go for it, I say.
It was nice also. And as an emergency, since all of us had webcams, I could literally like hold something up to the camera if there was a problem. But I am glad that Windows has kind of gotten on the, if I copy something, I should be able to paste it just about anywhere train. And that proved to be the easiest, where I could just grab the little snipping tool and just copy it, paste it directly into the Skype chat and have it pop up. The weirdest part is a lot of people did not have their webcams like lined up with their screens. So it looked like everyone was kind of looking off to the side the entire time. So everyone is watching everyone else look a little bit off to the side the entire time. It was like having a conversation with a driver, and you're not entirely sure if they're paying attention to you or not, or just the road. Hopefully it's the road, but still.
Yeah, I've experienced that phenomenon also. And I've talked with a number of people who get a little, disconcerted by it. I don't have a problem with it, but I think 5-10 years from now, everybody will be, well, yeah, of course, that's how we talk online.
Yeah.
But just for the announcements roundup, I have finished recording the first 4 episodes of Mage 101. That was an effort that all of us Mage the Podcast hosts are working together on to offer people a gentle introduction to Mage the Ascension, intended for people who just have never read the books, don't know the game, really getting started. So the first 4 of those, I'm hoping to have those edited and available for people pretty soon. And get to work on the ones that come after those 4. Getting back to the Book of Mirrors, this has a number 19 on the spine. It came out in 1997, and of course, we're a little past halfway mark for the second edition of Mage the Ascension. This book had 6 authors with additional material from 5 more. I would say this is a grab bag. And when I say grab bag, I mean this book offers a lot of different things, hopefully on a similar theme. The theme of this book is a storyteller's guide, and I think it's worth pointing out that when you take first edition and second edition of Mage the Ascension and put them together, all through 2 editions worth, we have one player's guide, and that was in first edition, Book of Shadows. We have one storyteller's guide, and this is it, the Book of Mirrors. But getting to this book in particular, we're not going to do really a section-by-section walkthrough, even though Terry is a master, a level 5 master by now, I have to admit it. We have a book in front of us here that is really just made up of parts. So first off, we're starting with Chapter 1. It's called Anatomy of a Chronicle, and what Chapter 1 is trying to do is give us a hypothetical example of a mage chronicle that some people ran. And there are the names of real, actual people, several of whom wrote for Mage the Ascension. So it looks like they took a real chronicle that actually was run. And it says, okay, we're going to look at the early stage, the middle stage, the later stages, and we're going to present to you an example of how this can be done. And in the process, we're also going to give you advice on how do I be a storyteller. Now that I've accomplished beginner storyteller, how do I become a better storyteller? And so that's what Chapter 1 is all about. Starting off, Terry, what did you see in Chapter 1, Anatomy of a Chronicle?
In a storyteller guide in the 90s, I've only looked at a couple, but it seemed like the 2 things that they attempted to do was, 1, give advice on how to actually run a game. Like, the players know what they're doing. They're swinging swords and casting magic missile and stuff. The storyteller is the person responsible for making that world. And at the time, you're dealing with mostly simulationist games, or at least those are the more common ones, where it's a standard attribute between 3 and 18. It's probably in a fantasy setting. There's certainly other games out there that don't fit into that Tolkien-esque high fantasy mode, but the most popular ones that are being played are like those. And those presume a certain way in which the world is going to work. And the other half of what a storyteller guide would do is give expanded rules of some sort. So maybe things that the players didn't need to know, or things that would allow you to improvise or modify a setting. And what a storyteller guide does has certainly changed over time. When I look at newer books, the division between the core rule book, the player book, and the storyteller book is now kind of coming down to 2 books, where you have a relatively thin player book that explains the setting and the rules that everyone needs to know, and a much chunkier book that is just all the rules for the storyteller, which is something that is terribly convenient for the players. They can buy a cheaper book that is smaller, and the storyteller book is going to be something that's much thicker that your table only needs one of. This comes before that change. So when Adam refers to it as a grab bag, to me, it kind of felt like a collection of notes and ideas and questions that maybe the developers had been getting over the course of the evolution of Mage that they then wanted to put out into the world. It feels like a collection of essays and the other things that maybe didn't quite fit into the other books, almost like a hidden lore for storytellers. And in Chapter 1, we get a section called Call to Adventure, Beginning the Game, which talks about what a chronicle is, how to prepare for one, how to select players, and what to deal with. And this section walks through the difference between an open and a closed chronicle. Are you going to allow the characters to create whatever they want and just build a story around that? Are you going to say, hey, this is the plot we're going to do, or this is going to be the main thing that happens in this game, make a character that fits it, all the way out to, I'm your storyteller, here are the characters, I've already made them for you, to how do we prepare for a chronicle and how do we deal with the mechanics of a group. And to me, this was a recurring theme I will probably have is useful at the time, but things have changed in the intervening space. It felt to me like the book was assuming that your players had either role-played before, in which case they were familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, or had not role-played before and were probably drama club nerds. And I feel as if that doesn't transfer well into modernity, where there are now so many games, it is entirely possible for someone to not have a D&D background. But at the same time, if someone is interested in an RPG, they're probably not necessarily the drama club kid. So a lot of the advice on how to deal with rules lawyers or power gamers is, to me, not too useful, because the biggest concern I run into as a storyteller is the fact that we're all adults with busy lives. How do I compress the system down as much as possible for someone to play it? Where I do think the game shone was that it did a good job of giving storytellers license. When a book says, hey, this thing is hard, and I've had the experience at my table of going, wow, this part of the game is hard, even if it doesn't actually help me, I still feel like it's a justification, because it's saying, yeah, this thing that you think is hard, it's actually hard. And I go, oh, okay, that means I'm probably not a terrible storyteller, which I certainly appreciated when they talked about, like, yeah, crossover games, everyone wants to do them. They're difficult to do. And adjudicating magical effects is quite difficult, and it's the core of the game. Boy, howdy, is that difficult. So to me, it did a lot of reassuring the storyteller that things were difficult and what they considered to be the most difficult aspects of running a game to be. The most useful advice, I thought, was they gave you reminders of a Chronicle is not just one food. It's not just everyone sitting around and eating a pizza. It's everyone sitting around and eating a pizza and having a drink. And the drink, this refreshing moment of reflection, that might be your seeking. And in addition to that, you're going to have dessert. So you may periodically want to do something that is off theme, but don't do it too much. And that is good, solid advice that should always be there. And it is good for that to exist. But if you read through this section and you're like, I'm only getting about half the stuff, in the same way that the book comforts a storyteller in saying certain sections are hard, me, Terry Robinson from Mage the Podcast, is going to comfort the reader of this book in saying, you may not find everything in this particular section useful. Games have changed over time.
Yeah, a good point. The writers were enthusiasts about tabletop role-playing games, and they made some assumptions that, hey, everybody's going to be like us and have this kind of experience. And 20-something years later, fans of role-playing games, it's a different scene. And so, yeah, this does date itself. There's some good reassurances, there's some good advice, and there's some advice that I don't think is going to apply so well for people these days. Generally speaking, pages 13 through 23 are, hey, you've never been a storyteller, let's get you started. And I thought, well, okay, there's some good stuff here. It's not solid gold, but it's quite good. Now, pages 23 to 41 are, you've been storytelling for a while, let's help you be a better storyteller. And I thought, okay, well, I'm glad that they thought about that and that they offered that advice. But pages 23 through 41, I think people who've been storytellers for a while already know this stuff. I didn't find it quite as helpful. It's like I think anybody running games is going to know this. Also, there's a number of things that were repeats from earlier books. It's like there's a couple of sections where they say, hey, blue booking, it's a great idea. We're going to tell you about it. And then at the end they say, well, if you're interested in blue booking, go look at hidden lore because it's explained better there. It's like, yeah, it is actually. So why do you take up so much space? But two specific things are on page 37. It talks about here, resonance is a thing in Mage. Here's how we can look at that. And I read through that short section. I thought, I don't think this is terribly helpful for a new storyteller who wants a little hint on getting resonance into his or her game. I don't think this is terribly helpful. I think you could have had the same length but much greater value by telling people, look, resonance can give you a -1, -2, or a +1, +2 if it's based on a certain thing that is in tune with the magic that is being done or against it, and tell people, hey, there is no list of resonances. Every storyteller has to make up their own resonances. Also, quote, the plot of a good game is just like that of a good book, end quote. I disagree with this. I think that people who are getting into storytelling thinking, oh, it's like writing a novel, okay, I'm going to take that wisdom and run with it. I think that's not the best advice. I think setting up a storytelling session for your players is different. Prepping for your game is quite different from writing a novel. A novel has a beginning, middle, and end. You know where it's going. You're pushing it towards that one conclusion that is right for everything you're trying to do. When you've got a game with players, that's not the right thing to do. You've got to leave some open, vague gaps where your players do what they want to do. And you should not have one particular goal in mind that you're striving towards, because your players might have something different in mind that is either better or more appropriate for what they want. Let the game happen. You'll find some good stuff in there that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, World of Darkness Gaming did not quite hit the generation of games that came out after this that essentially said that the players and the storytellers are all responsible for building the world. They're just responsible for different parts of it.
Yeah.
There's still this notion that the storyteller is the dungeon master and they provide the landscape that the players play on, and that players really should just swing swords and cite dialogue and move plot forward and not necessarily propose setting changes, and that maybe a storyteller shouldn't suggest what a character should do that would come out in later editions of games. And that's fine. We cannot criticize a book for not taking into consideration developments that hadn't yet happened in the RPG system. And when Adam was saying, hey, we don't actually get resonance rules, I kind of wanted to make a crack about, that second edition book, Fallen Tower Las Vegas, that due to a Paradox backlash was actually released as like the third from final book and revised. I agree. If you're not going to actually provide a rule for something, at least saying something like every magical effect a character should do should have some sort of scent that follows them around for up to the next day that the character should describe periodically. I don't understand the idea of just vaguely describing something and then not even providing a whiff of a system for it. I understand that it sounds like a rules lawyer, but well-made systems really help a storyteller know what their job is, and if they are well designed, it kind of makes the chronicle naturally flow. The storyteller can always discard a rule, but it is much harder, in my opinion, for someone who is new to the game to make up an idea from whole cloth than it is for them to shed something that they feel isn't working for them.
Even at this time, there were examples of role-playing games and how to run role-playing games from like the mid-'70s to the early '80s that were much more open-ended, but that was just in fantasy role-playing, and it was also considered like this old thing that we know better now. We're doing things in a new way now. And so it's understandable to me why the White Wolf writers didn't look to those old fantasy games and say, hey, there's good material here. It's like, yeah, the whole industry was saying, oh yeah, that's old, let's do this new exciting thing now. And so now years later the industry has changed again, and it's seen wisdom in all different areas and been able to better incorporate that together. So we get the benefit of that in the 21st century.
It does give some pretty quality advice, though. For instance, if characters are going to spend experience points, they need to be able to justify where they're going. It includes some very practical considerations, like making sure that you have enough space, picking appropriate food that should be made available, little extra touches you could have. I personally oppose the introduction of battle maps and floor plans into my Mage games, but the idea of having in-world props like letters or pictures or something that you can introduce, and the idea of having an episode guide, which is a running list of what has happened in the Chronicle. One of the techniques that I like regarding this is to have a player start each session with a recap of what happened in the previous session, just as a reminder. And it also gives us an amazing picture on page 18 where there are it's a lovely little Alex Shakeman piece of art where there are two dead bodies on the ground, and there is this person with what looks like a Nike shoe, and it just has the Sons of Ether logo on the back of it, and you're like, okay. someone messed with the wrong scientist. So for that alone, I appreciated chapter 1. And I guess my final comment is the one piece of advice it gave that I think to me is what kills the most number of games that I have played in, is that it emphasizes having atmosphere and sensory detail. You don't need to tell the players what they do as they go through a scene, but describe the world with enough detail that everyone probably has a somewhat similar mental image. And it goes through the idea of creating a sense file, that anywhere you are somewhere new, take a moment to think about the sights, sounds, smells, and maybe even tastes and textures that you're encountering there. Write them down mentally and be able to draw on that later.
Yes, certainly. And also with the recap at the beginning of each session, it can be a very helpful thing for the players. When one player says, this is what happened, there's usually one or two other players that say, oh, it was like that, I thought it was like this, and the players kind of have a quick huddle and say, oh, okay, this is what happened, we're on the same page now. So it can be very helpful. I think we're ready for chapter 2, the Storyteller Corner. And this was a different sort of a chapter from what we find in most Mage books. This was where the developer, Sotiros Brocato, who was being credited at the time under the name Phil Brocato, was saying, look, this is just a question and answer. These are questions that I get a lot from different people, and I'm just going to answer them. Was it out of character, just as me, the developer? There were some interesting things in here. There were a number of points that came up. There's just some advice on how do you run a seeking for one player at a time. And there has been advice for seekings in earlier books, but I still think that this is valuable. It says, look, let's break it down into the basic aspects of what's going on here, and here's how you might approach it. And it's a brief section, but I think it's helpful. What's something you saw in there, Terry?
Well, the thing that I think comes out in an FAQ is there are levels of truth, as it were, that a book gives us. And the lowest level of truth is in fiction, when we have a bit, like maybe at the beginning of a chapter or beginning of a book, where a character in world says out loud what they think is going on. That is the least credible source for canon information that we have in Mage. And a level removed from that, we have characters who are in world narrating a section. And then a step removed from that is kind of the omniscient conversation with the storyteller that occurs in some books, where a person that is kind of presumed to be in world is saying, hey, this is how it really is. And then a level of truth beyond that is the rules and systems section, where it is the impersonal, dry, legalistic writing of this is how to run this. And then with an FAQ from the developer, there's like a level of truth on top of this. This is literally the developer unambiguously saying, this is how the game works. And if nothing else, I like the fact that we have that level of truth where you can just go, oh, we don't have to deal with officiatory bullshit anymore. That's nice, because it's just the developer telling you how things work. In terms of the FAQ section that kind of made me raise my eyebrow was page 45. The question is, why do so many Mage books contradict each other? And the response is, with a few exceptions, like rules changes between first and second edition, they don't. They just seem to contradict each other because there's often told from subjective viewpoints rather than objective ones. And I'm like, I feel like
I will second that opinion.
I feel like in most episodes we find one or two things where we particularly point out, hey, this is where this departs from what has been previously established. I did like the behind the scenes stuff where it doesn't actually help you play the game at all, but I do like a little bit of ephemera or a little bit of marginality about the game, where on page 47 it's like, so the Stuart Wick, Stephen Wick, and Mark Rain Hagen were the main thrust behind it, but they developed the ideas in this way, and the Chris's Hind and Early brainstormed for about a year, and we came up with the bones of a game, and here were the playtesters, and these were the initial thoughts, and initially we thought of tying it in with Werewolf, and then it developed in its own way, and I like that. I thought that was useful, and it gives you unambiguous answers to certain questions, like, do mages experience the delirium? No. Next question. When are you coming out with a Nefandi player's guide? I'm not. Period. And then it also answers a bunch of questions head on, like, what good are foci anyway? I know reality is malleable. My characters know it too. Why not just throw them away? And it gives a long explanation of how that is fundamental to the game Mage, and how if you get rid of it, you get a fundamentally different game that you are allowed to play, and is probably going to be super fun. But I think the part I liked the most was the time science and technomancy section, where it really dived into, as much as a book could, what are the lines between science and technology? When does something become coincidental and vulgar? Is there something else at work? And how to apply what may be hyperscience from gadgetry, from how that is different than what your traditional wizard is doing. So I guess the key things that I liked was we got a bunch of unambiguous answers to a bunch of questions. We got a bunch of arguments that a storyteller can use to say, hey, I understand that you may not like this part of the game, but this is why it's actually super important. We got a good discussion on what paradigm is, and we got a peek behind the scenes. Those were what I liked about this section.
Mm-hmm. Page 45 has what I call the Rashomon controversy. This is the first time in a Mage book where the 1950 Japanese movie Rashomon is referenced. And this movie will be mentioned by Mage writers in later Mage books all the way through Mage 20. They're saying that Rashomon is such an interesting movie because it presents a situation where the characters in the movie have to deal with the fact that there is no way of finding the truth. There are different points of view, different perspectives, which come from, who those people are. And when everybody gets together and discusses what really happened, there's no way of knowing what really happened. And isn't this cool? And isn't this appropriate for Mage? Because, mages have all this talk about paradigm. I think that's a great discussion. I think it's a great idea. However, when you watch the movie with good subtitles, unfortunately, it falls apart. But basically, you watch the movie and one guy is talking to some other guys and he's saying, hey, there was this court case and all these different testimony was presented. And the guy's listening to the story like, oh, wow, that's so wild. There's no way of finding out what happened. And the guy's like, no, really, I was there. This is what really happened. And they're like, oh, that's what happened. Okay. And then the whole rest of the movie is a meditation on morality, because everyone presenting testimony in the court case was lying for their own personal reasons to make themselves look good. And so for the whole rest of the movie, the characters are really like getting into this real cerebral session about, wow, humanity is really immoral. And it's not just this group or that group. It's all of humanity. And gosh, we're so bummed by this. Is there any hope for the future? And the movie takes it from there. And it's very meaningful. It's a very good movie. I recommend it for people who like, some good movies. But moving on in this section, page 60, Brocado, the developer, says, for the record, I want to say that there will be no oracle rules or spheres. And then we get in second edition to a book at the tail end of second edition, Masters of the Art, where we get oracle level spheres. And someone who, just reading through the book saying, hey, Brocado, you said you weren't going to do it, and then you did it. It's like, okay, let me give the whole story here. Brocado said in a more recent interview, in the late 90s, he was actually pulled into a room with the leadership of White Wolf Game Studio at that time. And they said to him, hey, Vampire the Masquerade has really high-level disciplines for elder vampires, and isn't that cool? We want that for Mage. And Brocado said to the White Wolf leadership, I'm afraid that's not a very good idea. I have considered that. I don't think it's a good thing for the game. And I am the developer for the game. So isn't this my responsibility and not so much yours? I'm going to do a good job on Mage for you. And the White Wolf leadership said to him, no, you are going to write high-level spheres. You do not have a choice. You must go do that now. He did it grudgingly, and so that should not be held against Brocado. He had a plan, he had a reason for it, and it was out of his hands. So yeah. There's no use getting upset with Brocado over that. Terry mentioned foci. Brocado's approach to the game is a little different from the first edition Stuart Wick approach to the game. When we talked about the second edition core book, we got into this, Terry and I both got into this great big discussion of what are the underlying thematic and setting differences between first and second edition. Stuart Wick thought, isn't it fascinating to see a regular person awaken, become a mage, and then gradually awaken further and become something kind of like a demigod, some very powerful otherworldly kind of being that can command very high level powers and even loses interest in the regular world and steps into some set of other worlds like oracles do. And so when a mage loses a focus, they become able to do magic instantly. Like the blink of an eye, they're doing a multi-sphere, high-level, powerful effect. And Stuart Wick thought, isn't that interesting? I want to play with that. I even like the idea of unconscious magic. A master in different spheres is going to be working magic when he doesn't want to. He's not even trying to. It's like the unconscious part of his mind is doing sphere effects, and he finds out about it a week later. And Brocado approached Mage and said, no, I like focuses. I like the getting into the details of how a paradigm is actually played out in a scene. It's good role-playing. It's rich. It's interesting. Mages can talk about their foci with each other and compare them, make them a part of a scene. I really like this. I want to keep the foci. So I can see both approaches to this. And it was interesting to see in this section how that was really spelled out for me.
The feeling I got, mirroring yours, is that in first edition, there's no difference between focus and paradigm. The representation of the paradigm is the focus. I need to wiggle this wand to get this effect. And when I get rid of that focus, I no longer need to do anything because the focus was the representation of paradigm. In second edition, we get the idea that you can transcend focuses, albeit it's going to be a somewhat slow process and characters are generally presumed to be lower power. It's less on that cosmic scale. So there's this scaling back factor that you're not going to have shed so many focuses. And then in revised, we get the idea that a character can transcend both their focuses and their paradigm. There is this kind of side discussion where it's like people can have open or closed or narrow or deep paradigms. And it suggests that over time, characters will realize that maybe all magic is kind of the same. And then in 20th anniversary / 4th edition, we get the idea, or this is how it came across to me, that characters can transcend focuses, but they will never transcend their paradigm. They are always going to be bound by a worldview, even if they don't believe that they need to use the implements anymore. And I think that is one of those things that has changed across editions that not until I started reading a book every other week with Adam really came into focus with me.
First edition paradigms were training wheels that would get dropped as they became more powerful. And in second edition, paradigms were really this interesting thing. And in later editions, it's like these paradigms are so interesting to talk about and role play that let's really get into this.
Yeah, I like the paradigm as training wheels is the 1E view of things.
Also, quite interesting to me was, I don't have the page number here, but it says that the Scarcity of Nodes was dropped in second edition. And this really helped me because in first edition, of course, yeah. Nodes and quintessence were a scarce natural resource that mages battled each other to get their hands on because they wanted it so bad. And starting with Book of Chantries, which was early in first edition, I started reading all these references to mages find quintessence here and there and everywhere. They find it in Deep Umbra. They find it in a shoebox under the bed. They find it all over the place. And it's like, wow, quintessence seems like it's just easier to get your hands on now. And so here in Book of Mirrors in Chapter 2, it spells it out. It's like, yeah, we consciously changed this. That part of the Ascension War where the Technocracy is actively attacking the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions just to get their quintessence, that's toned down. It's not so bad now. Now it's more of an ideological thing. I'm going to make a quick reference to this on page 61. In the early days, role-playing games pitted the game master against his players. It's kind of a misconception that really locked down in the early days of the internet, where people think, back in the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, it was a contest between the dungeon master and the players. And after going to North Texas RPG Con and talking to a large number of people who were writing the fantasy role-playing games from 1974 to roughly 1984, that's not actually the case.
It wasn't explicitly player versus dungeon master, but I feel as if it was more acceptable to punish a player who did not know the rules and did not necessarily know the best way to advance forward. Matthew Dawkins has a story about playing some old school D&D and him being like, well, it's 2019. We can just open the door. And another character is like, oh, no, I'm going to tie my grappling hook around the handle and pull back. And he's like, no, that's stupid. Come on. He's not going to kill us. And he opens the door and immediately gets hit in the chest with 4 crossbow bolts. And the other one was, I will include the Penny Arcade comic in the show notes, where one of the characters says to the other, so you ran Tomb of Horrors last night. How did that go? Tomb of Horrors being a notorious early D&D, very deadly but very richly rewarding dungeon. And the one character is like, yeah, one character lost their arm in the first room, and we spent the rest of the evening with people throwing sticks through doors. What did they expect? That it was going to be the Tomb of Blowjobs and Jet Skis? That's not even the same tomb complex. Even if it is not true that it was player versus DM, that is certainly something that has entered the zeitgeist. And also on page 61, we have what appears to be a space priest with a Sons of Ether logo in the middle of their book. So I'm liking that Alex Shakeman was like, hey, I did a whole bunch of art for tradition book Sons of Ether that you jerks didn't use. This is my chance to go and use it, or something like that. Or maybe they had leftover art from the tradition book and they're just like, yeah.
Well, Tomb of Horrors was kind of among D&D modules, Tomb of Horrors was a special case, but I'm not going to go into that now. I think we're ready for Chapter 3, Behind the Scenes of the Ascension War.
Oh, yeah.
This was a rich chapter. A lot of good material here.
I also liked in Chapter 2 where it's like, who's really winning the Ascension War? And the response is, that would be telling. And then in Chapter 3, it's like, who's winning the Ascension War? The Nefandi. And
there's Chapter 3 divides up into 3 sections, which is opponents that your player characters are likely to face. And so back in second edition, there was still very much this kind of thought process that the player characters are probably going to want to play tradition mages or possibly craft mages. It was in later editions that there's more of this open assumption of, hey, player characters can be technocrats, and isn't that fun and isn't that interesting? And so we get this Chapter 3 is divided into 3 sections. We got the Marauders, the Nefandi, and the Technocracy. And yeah, reading through the Marauder section, there's this line where the author says, since the Nefandi are winning the Ascension War, the Marauders are likely to do this. And I was reading that line. It's like, okay, the Fallen are winning the war? Are they? I mean, is this corroborated anywhere else? Is this backed up or even repeated anywhere else? Well, no, actually, no, it isn't.
It was kind of funny because in the same way that in Werewolf, I always assumed that the Weaver was actually the enemy and not the worm. In Mage, the moment I picked up the book, the 2E core rule book, and I'm like reading through and it's like the Technocracy are the enemies we need to fight against. I'm like, nope. It's Nefandi. And like, this was literally the first Mage book I had ever picked up. And it was good to read this and be like, uh-huh, confirmed. The thing I liked about this was it goes through the three specific factions that are not the traditions and explains their methods, their hierarchy, what their goals are, and a bunch of groups from them that you can use. And the Marauder take is particularly interesting to me because it makes the comment that the vital point is that a Celestine of the wild chaos dynamism side of the war gives individual, carefully selected mages the ability to use their quiets as shield against paradox. Whether this happens willingly or not is presumably up to the ethics of the powers involved, which completely rewrites what the Marauders are, in that they are agents directly of the wild, and that the wild has been like, boop, you're my agent now. And that kind of rewrites what the Marauders are. At least I don't recall a reference earlier in Mage to say that the metaphysical trinity or agents of it, or that Celestines get directly involved. Do you remember one?
No, I don't. No, I back up your point. For me, the Marauder section was, let's start with the positive. And that was, there was a big sidebar on insanity types and how you might make Marauder NPCs based on these types of real life insanities. And not to make light of people with mental conditions. Certainly, the book was not trying to do that, and I don't think it does. Reading through this section, that was useful for me. It's like, as a storyteller, it's like, oh, I could take this kind of problem and build a Marauder like this, or I could take this other kind of problem and build a Marauder like that. And that's good. I like that. The rest of the Marauder section was not as interesting for me. I thought it was like a retread, basically a summarization, a repeat of what was in just one previous book, and that is Book of Madness. And there's a couple of places where it even refers directly to go see Book of Madness. Yeah. Also, we read in summaries on Storyteller's Vault that first edition, the cosmology of Werewolf, was kind of brought into Mage, and in second edition, Mage moved away from that and found its own direction. Here in Book of Mirrors, Chapter 3, we've got a great hearty helping of werewolf cosmology dropped right into second edition Mage. And it's like, okay, well, this is different. It's like saying everything we said in first edition that we're changing now, well, we're not changing it, sort of. And so there is a bit of contradiction in some of the Mage books. And I'm not saying, oh, this makes them terrible, but you notice it.
Yeah. I did like the fact that it outlines a bunch of groups within the Marauders. It makes them less a strangely uniform group of people who are just kind of crazy, and gives you a lot more details about what kind of Marauders there could be, which was a criticism that Adam and I both had of Book of Mirrors. And we also get an interesting peek into Marauder structure, where they talk about fusions, who are Marauders that have all Marauder awakened or converted to Marauder because of a single shared experience. And this could be something that persists over time, like a nuclear waste dump, all drawing people into a particular kind of paranoia or to a particular kind of delusion. We also get the idea of a Cabal, which is almost like a traditional Cabal, where people have some sort of organization, they have a leader, and they have a shared agenda. We also get the Conflux, which I think is probably the coolest, where Marauder avatars kind of get together to form a group, and the participants aren't even necessarily aware of what they're doing. And the idea of your avatar convincing you to do something without something that you're aware of, I think is something that should exist in the world of Mage, because to me, the avatar is kind of this weird semi-alien thing that may have its own agenda. I don't know how you would roleplay that at a table if you wanted to have your PCs engage in it, but it's one of those fascinating ideas that says, well, if we all have avatars and they have the ability to do magic, they can probably communicate with each other, and maybe they have their own little agendas, which I thought was interesting. And then we get a listing of groups. We had already been exposed to the Butcher Street Regulars and a few other groups, but it just gives you a bunch of other names to give you ideas, like the Bai Dai, the Fantastic 26, the Forces of Chaos, the Shangri-La Ladies Club, and so on. And I love when a Mage book just gives me a list of first sentences that I can could use to expand a group out from there. And it does that in spades, even if some of the other parts are a little bit messy.
One new thing in this Marauder section is it says that Marauders are against Nefandi and Technocrats and will always, move against, attack them, try to stop them. And I actually didn't like this because, from my point of view, it makes Marauders predictable and it opens the door to tradition and craft mages manipulating Marauders with more predictability. And so I don't see a strong justification for Marauders always hating Nefandi and Technocrats and not having any particular attitude towards tradition mages. And so that was something that was not my favorite to see, but other people are going to have other opinions on that.
So the Nefandi section, again, this is retreading a material from the Book of Madness, but it does put everything in one place where it goes through the ranks, where we go from unawakened pawns to awakened pawns to Shaitans, who are the kind of fallen SWAT soldiers, to the Sinistrati, who are the frontline seducers that try and convert people to their cause, to the Prolati, who are the eyes and hands of the Gelidians, and they roam the tapestry, kind of enacting the will of their masters, up to the Gelidians, the 8 beings, 4 dead, some neither alive nor dead, and some just flat out dead but still active, that seem to lead the various groups of Nefandi up to the Ashwadim, the Bodhisattvas of the Void, which I thought was an awesome term, or the Oracles. And it gives you kind of this unitary hierarchy of who they are. It still breaks it down into the traditional Kalasha, who worship the outer things, the Malfians, who want to see the destruction of everything through the rising up of the worm, and finally the Infernalist cults, who pledge themselves to demons in exchange for power. It kind of brings to a head the fact that these two things don't necessarily directly make sense with one another. How do you have 8 Gelidians if they have 3 different factions that they serve? They never do a map of how one goes to the other. And we also get on page 86 some of Richard Dansky's greatest work. I believe this was Richard Dansky that says the Nefandi are powered by the dreams of Malfians. So there is this idea that during World War II, in the wake of the 5th Great Maelstrom, that Gruul, this Malfian, this creature that has been dreaming near the void of oblivion since creation, arises, fights Charon in the Weeping Bay. Both of them disappear, and once Gruul awakened, a whole bunch of Nefandi were left powerless, and that some technocrats did an investigation into why, and they found out that the Nefandi are powered by the dreams of the powerful Malfians, which is kind of suggested in later metaplot to be the reason that Xerxes Jones ignited a spirit nuke at the Well of the Void. Maybe if we wake up more of these creatures, the Nefandi will get weaker, screw the underworld, and so on. But this completely rewrites the cosmology of several games at once, and also is obviously not carried forward, because in Revised, the rest of the Malfians eventually wake up in the Orpheus continuity, and it does not appear that the Nefandi lose access to all their power. But man, is this an interesting little nugget that a storyteller can play with, even if it doesn't actually make sense with everything else. And I just love that stuff.
Yeah, Malfian can actually be somewhat of a confusing term for World of Darkness fans, because Malfian can mean a Nefandi who serves Malpheus. It can also mean beings that come from Malpheus. Malpheus is a realm in the Umbra. It's mentioned a lot more in the Werewolf the Apocalypse game books. Malpheus is this very negative, very evil, very corrupt and dirty and vile realm where the worm of werewolf cosmology exists, and from there it sends out very malevolent and powerful beings to cause all kinds of pollution, corruption, evil on Earth. So a Malfian can be a spirit being that comes out of there. It can be a Nefandi who consciously serves those lords. And it can also be these powerful beings that exist in the low Umbra, the Umbra of the dead. They're also called Malfians. I call them by another name. They have a Neverborn, which is actually a really cool name. Neverborn, and I reserve the term Malfian Lord for the beings that come out of Malpheus. Hopefully that helps out some of the new Mage fans out there. One thing I thought was cool was, even though this new idea is dropped that the Nefandi serve low Umbra Neverborn, it's not fleshed out in a lot of detail. It's kind of thrown out there. Isn't this an interesting idea? And I agree, it is, but there's not a lot of depth for it. So if you want to run with it, you're going to have to handle that on your own. But what I thought was cool was it said, all Nefandi labyrinths, and labyrinth is a term for a Nefandi chantry, all Nefandi labyrinths are imitations. They're like miniature copies of the great labyrinth that exists in the Low Umbra where the Neverborn call home. And I thought, that's kind of a neat idea. I could see some chronicles where mages learn a bit about the Low Umbra, and then they apply that information when they move against Nephandic labyrinths.
I also like the idea of this as a plot hook that, or a chronicle idea that it's like, hey, if these things are empowered by it, let's wake one up and see what happens. Somehow the players manage to awaken another Neverborn. The Nefandi are still in power, and we still have and now we have a Neverborn to deal with. Oh, dip. So this is, to me, a great example of a theory that could exist in game that doesn't necessarily have to be canon, but there's just enough truth on it to be like, oh man, Jim's really onto something. We should try and run with this and try and wake up Zira or Lechimachus or Mulhectorus or something like that and see what happens. So storytellers, have at it.
The final section of Chapter 3 of Book of Mirrors is about the Technocracy. And for me, this is the gem of the book. This was written by Brian Campbell. And, I sound like a fanboy, but I'm just going to say it. Hats off to you, Brian Campbell. Great job. This section was so nice for me because it accomplishes several things very well in a pretty tight page count. It takes material from the 4 convention books that came before, and it kind of pulls out the highlights and lays it down in one place where you can quickly get a look at the most interesting factions from within the conventions, the most interesting game terms, ranks within the different conventions, leaders, agendas that those conventions are following. It just lays it out neatly. This section gives a very good explanation of the original idea behind the Technocrats when Mage first started in 1993 with the first edition core book. And a sort of misunderstanding has grown up over time that the Technocracy sort of somehow represents this idea that science and technology are not a good thing and they're having a negative effect on global society, and wouldn't it be nice if we went back to the old ways? And that wasn't really the original idea of the Technocracy. It was more, to summarize, in a technology-rich society, people tend to look at things a certain way, and they get into a certain groove with their thinking. If you take that too far, it can have negative effects, and the Technocracy kind of weaponizes that. It's like a severe representation of what if we took this thinking way too far and then put some villains behind that who are actively pushing that agenda. And so it's interesting, and it lays that out nicely for the readers and says, this is how the Technocracy was originally conceived. A lot of people don't know that. You don't have to play them that way, but before you decide how I'm going to represent the Technocracy, it's nice to know all your choices. Also, there's a section called agendas, like a subheading called agendas, and it's basically, here are things that the Technocracy is doing. Here's how you can use that as a storyteller. Here's how you can make stories based on different groups within the Technocracy and different plans that the Technocracy is pursuing. And I thought it was so well done. It was a short section, but it was just solid gold.
And unlike the Nefandi and the Marauders, who had been detailed heavily in the Book of Madness, this is almost a case where we've gotten too much detail on the Technocracy, and you needed this section to kind of give you that high-level view that let you fit the pieces together.
Yes.
The agenda section points out that a Nefandi is going to try and destroy the players or convert them. There's really not a lot of nuance to it, but they specifically say one of the goals is to recruit promising traditionalists. So that suggests that the Technocracy's first response to being introduced to a traditional Cabal is saying, here are some potential future recruits, not here are things to practice our laser rifle marksmanship with. That framing makes the Technocracy much less lethal, but much more multifarious in terms of what they're going to do. It gives you a lot of options on how a Chronicle could interface with it. It gives you a lot of information on their tactics, which this section does for all of the groups, which I found to be super handy. And it gives you an overview of how the Technocracy works, which up until now, I don't feel any book had really done in the same way that like Book of Madness had done for the Nefandi. It gives it some brief information on how the technocracy interfaces with the mortal world. They make a side comment about the FBI having been infiltrated by vampires, and I'm like, vampire guys, can anyone confirm this? And I think one of the comments that in 1997 maybe aged the least well was the statement, "It doesn't take much to monitor who's going where." This is in reference to travel agency. "Thanks to the threats of terrorism, airline passengers are screened more closely than ever, and computer technology makes tracking them easy." And it's 1997 when this came out, and September 11th hadn't happened yet. And I was just like, buddy, you wait till you see what's coming. So that was just kind of a sober call about what's there. But yeah, this really put a lot of things together.
Yeah, like Terry said, technocracy was never in Book of Madness, and so we never got a really good look at the technocracy as a whole before. I mean, yeah, in different core books and stuff, it gives information on them. But one thing this section did that I loved was it encouraged the storyteller to see the technocracy as symposia more than separate conventions. Because when you read through the convention books, it's talking about only one convention at a time. And so you get into this thinking of, how am I going to use this convention in my chronicle? Whereas a symposium, or plural symposia, is you take a large city in the developed world, and you say, okay, there is a group of technocrats who are responsible for the technocracy as a whole for this city, and it's different conventions combined working together. Of course, the technocracy has more unity than the Council of Nine, but I like how it encourages a storyteller to say, look, I'm going to take New York City, and I'm going to take the symposium for New York City. How is the technocracy working together to do what it wants to do in New York City? And another thing this section did that I thought was great was it gave me a nice explanation for why the technocrats haven't yet stomped the opposition, and the opposition meaning the other mages. They have 3 different goals, and they cannot prioritize them. Goal number 1, remove or pacify opposing factions of mages. Goal number 2, explore and secure other dimensions and deep space. Goal number 3, influence sleeper society to go in a certain direction. These are all big goals. And if the technocracy can't really figure out very well which one to prioritize, then yeah, it makes sense that they have not yet stomped on the crafts and the traditions. So nice way of summing that up.
I think there were a bunch of interesting nuggets that we get in this chapter as well, which is kind of my closing comments. One, I find it interesting that once you are in a Fondi, you can't go back. There is a fundamental change to your avatar. Once you become a marauder, there's no going back. You have been tapped by a Celestine and your mind is fundamentally changed. But for the traditions and the technocracy, they're not one way. You can still move back and forth, which I find kind of interesting. Another one is they comment on what happens to the masters of each type, and they mention that technocratic archmages or master scientists tend to withdraw into the Umbra to focus on theories and their pure ideas, or to engage in politics. And I thought it was interesting that it specifically more or less said that there is a big divide between very advanced or hyper-enlightened technocrats and everyone else. Like there's nothing in Mage that suggests that an Archmaster is no longer active in the Ascension conflict, where I find it interesting that super advanced technocrats generally will either withdraw into themselves or withdraw into organizational politics. And I just kind of found that interesting. They also, I think, introduced the term Horizon Collective, which are the satellites in geosynchronous orbits above cities. And they say that even larger than a horizon collective are a horizon construct. And I don't remember having seen those before. And I think that was kind of cool. But those were just a few little throwaway bits in that section that I felt were novel, or at least I don't recall having been called out before.
Yeah. One nitpick in this section on page 90, it says an adept is a beginning tradition mage. And actually, a beginning tradition mage is an apprentice. And after they're a full-fledged member, they're called a disciple. But okay, nitpick of mine. Yeah. But minor problem. Well, I think we're ready for Chapter 4, and this is called Supporting Cast. This is the chapter that talks about how do you use animals, regular humans called sleepers, and umbral spirits as NPCs in a chronicle.
I don't feel a need to do a recount because it's like, here are stats for animals. Here's how to use an animal as a familiar and so on. And again, I feel like the most interesting bit here is to remind players that if you switch forms to an animal or an animalized view of the world, or you're dealing with one, they're going to have a fundamentally different sensory experience than you are. Smell is probably going to be much bigger. I think one of the terms it uses, animals don't use toilet paper, which I thought was a good reminder that if someone shifts forms and is like that for a while, we get the rule that if you shapeshift, you have to spend a point of willpower a day to remember what it was like to be human. And then we get a big wall of animal statistics, which whenever I see those, I'm like, we do get the line, cheetah runs faster than anything on earth except for a saguaro were-cheetah. So what's better than a cheetah? A were-cheetah. And, and like when I read that section, I just pictured the metal guitar in the back going and be like,
yes, nice touch.
We find out that cobras have a willpower of 6, but great apes only have a willpower of 3, and that rats have a willpower of 4, but a rhinoceros only has a willpower of 3, and none of that made any sense. But it does give you relative size, which is super useful, a number of health levels, and an idea of what their different attacks are. But that was just like, okay, I understand. You wanted to have animal statistics, and we got them. And if you need to use them, may God have mercy upon you. This was also a restatement. I mean, we got pack and swarm rules and hidden lore, I think.
Well, actually, I do remember seeing swarm rules in Destiny's Price.
Okay, that's what it was, Destiny's Price. The next part they go over is how to introduce mortals. And the thing that's funny about normal people is the people playing the game are normal people. So we are normal people playing mages who are then interacting with normal people. And it's like, here's advice for interacting with normal people. I'm like, who do you think is playing this game? Like, is this a guide for aliens who are like infiltrating human civilization? It does give some vital reminders that like normal people are people too. Yeah, like us, like the people playing the game. And this to me is kind of a reminder that it is possible to run a game where mages are better than everyone else and you're on the front lines in the war of reality. But at the end of the day, when this book came out, there were 6 billion humans running around, and now there are 7.5 billion humans running around, and they all have goals and desires and beliefs and wants, and don't just use them as window dressing, and don't just use them as set pieces of things to kill when a hit mark goes ape-nard. So I certainly appreciated that. It talks about the limits of what human believers will do, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And then finally, the next set, we get an explanation on our spirits. And this is a section that gives you a few ideas on how to present spirits in a game. And it kind of comes from the perspective of when characters encounter a spirit, it's in a very mage context. So unlike in Werewolf and Axis Mundi, which we recently reviewed, where spirits have fixed forms and fixed associations and so on, here it presents an idea that when you're dealing with an umbral lord, so something that maybe isn't a nature spirit or something from the Middle Umbra, they may take on the form of what the viewer expects. And one of the ones was, of course, the viewer may not understand precisely why she sees the spirit in such a fashion. And the quote they have is, why does the ocean spirit look like a seaweedy version of J. Edgar Hoover? Which I just thought was a good line. And it says you can present them in the old-fashioned way that everyone is talking to Thor, or in different voices where each character sees a different thing, or the tactic I usually take, the faceless god, that it is atmospheric, that in the presence of a high umbral lord, you experiencing swirls of clouds or explosions or mists or smoke or other things that are kind of harder to explain. And then finally, it presents an idea of how to bargain with the unseen. And again, it mentions that people are going to negotiate with spirits and doesn't really provide much of a systems way of doing it. And it talks about a successful charisma plus spirit lore or against difficulty 5 plus the spirit's rage. Kind of makes it so mages are never going to be able to bargain with anything because a lot of spirits have rages higher than 5, which immediately makes it impossible or at least super hard because of threshold successes. So this section on the spirits I think was a little bit messy, and I think the spirit world being messy is going to be something that plagues Mage all through 2nd edition. That's just me. And then we get a few sample spirits. We finally get the Reaper, which is a death epipling, which is the standard representation of a person with a cowl and a scythe. And it talks about how no number of Terry Pratchett novels will prepare you for interacting with it, and it doesn't care how many Gaiman comics you have read. And I'm like, shots fired, nerds.
Yes. Yeah, the Gaiman comics are Sandman, where death is a endless, immortal sort of a being, and it's presented as a nice, personable young woman that everyone enjoys talking with.
Yep, and who is depicted on page 116 in the art, where you have the eye of the lady with the Eye of Horus tattoo, who is looking at the death card on a tarot table. I'm like, a little on the nose there, I think. So this was a chapter. What were your thoughts, Adam?
Well, in terms of chapter 4, my thoughts were not that different from yours. I liked getting the animal stats. All this stuff about willpower and specifics was not as useful for me. But as a storyteller, I do like being able to refer to something like, okay, a lion has this many health levels because they're different from the number of health levels a human has, and getting strength and endurance. And that's for when I'm using animals, that's usually what I use in terms of statistics. And so it's nice to have all that in one place. And the stuff like willpower, et cetera, that I don't use, I just ignore. The storyteller advice on how to use sleepers, that is regular humans and animals, I thought it was nice. I guess it was good. There's nothing in there I object to or I think is in any way misleading. But on the other hand, a lot of this is information I could kind of come up with myself. I sort of assumptions I would already make. And so I don't think it's as useful as some other things in this book, but it was nice. I'm not going to complain about it. The section on using umbral spirits, I thought that was nice, actually. Perhaps it was a bit messy in terms of systems you can use in play, but in terms of ideas for how to work with Umbrood as a storyteller, I think it was helpful and I think it was nice. I liked reading that. I thought it was a nice little add-on to Book of Worlds, where they talk more about umbral realms and the things you'll meet there. I liked the additional sample Umbrood they have towards the end of this section. They have different epiphlings and a few other things, and I like that. I thought it was nice to add it in. Yeah, the spirits section was my favorite part of chapter 4, and the other two were like nice but not so important.
Also, they give hyenas and jackals the same statistics, despite the fact that, like, a hyena is going to be 2 to 3 times the size of a jackal. Anyway, sorry, I just had to. A bobcat you could fit in your pocket. A lynx will kill your family. Okay. Sorry. Well, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, I'm giving you statistics. I'm like, you better come. Bring your A game, buddy, or else we're going to have a rumble. Sorry.
Okay, well, moving on to chapter 5, we've got alternate Chronicle settings. This is a chapter where we see how you could take your mage setting to a whole different world, a whole different setting for mage, but still use, the basic factions and rules and stuff. And the history section is the longest. It's like, hey, here's some ideas for having a historical setting for your mage game. And in this section, for this whole chapter 5, my thoughts were, this is kind of nice. It's kind of interesting. The first 2 historical settings was prehistory and the classical age, like ancient Rome, ancient Greece. In those sections, there's a bit of information for, here's some quick information for how to make magic easier to cast. You set it on Hyosphere plus these difficulties instead of just on Arete. And I thought that was neat. I thought it was interesting. The classical era is a little bit harder than prehistory, and that was useful for me. But for the rest of the history section, it was interesting reading. I guess some nice ideas, but not so terribly important. And to be honest, a lot of the historical information I already knew, or the ideas they suggest, I think a storyteller can come up with on their own. A nice chapter.
We get an interesting dichotomy in that the first few passages give you recommendations on how to modify the rules of magic to fit with the times. And then all of a sudden after that, Adam pointed out that it's like, then it just goes straight into history without too much of a consideration of how paradigm would influence it, or maybe how magic was different. And I kind of like the idea that in prehistoric times, the simple spheres, as it describes them, would be easy to use. Forces, life, matter, prime, and spirit versus correspondence, entropy, mind, and time might demand higher difficulties. And I'm like, that's kind of interesting. And it also gives you options to be like, hey, one of the neat things about prehistoric times is all of the other World of Darkness lines have some sort of prehistory. And it says, do you want to consider the Impergium, the period of time where werewolves were just killing humans? Do you want to have this take place during the War of Rage? Do you want to have third generation or second generation vampires tooling around? Do you want to have the True Fae still walking the earth? That is a supplement I would super be interested in seeing or reading. Yeah, the history stuff, it's history. Again, this is one of those things where it was like before Wikipedia, you kind of had to include just enough for everything. So it is a useful time capsule. It even extends it forward to say, do you want to include the near future? And one of the ones that's kind of interesting is, what if you set a game after the Ascension War, that something has torn reality apart and now it's a game of survival in a world that maybe still has magic that has been nuked to death, or everyone has to be in an umbral realm for survival. Maybe your characters caused it. I like the line, perhaps they were low-level technomancers who unwittingly let loose a nuclear horror or deadly virus. Maybe they were sorcerers who made a literal devil's deal with infernal powers and were left to rot on a dying earth. And I'm like, whoo! Yep, that is why I pay for these books. Little sentences like that for ideas that I would not have come up with. We get more information in different books later, maybe on how to explore that, and obviously eventually we get Mage, Sorcerer's Crusade, and Dark Ages Mage. Yeah, right. So to cover those.
Well, Chapter 6 is Observations from the Field, and these are essays from the Mage authors to the storytellers. These essays are supposed to inspire a storyteller or clarify underlying themes of the game. When looking through these essays, I guess they were interesting. I didn't think they were anything terribly groundbreaking, at least not from my point of view. It was fun to see something from James Estes. I always like reading what he has to say. However, this particular essay, although I guess it was kind of interesting to read, it was nothing really groundbreaking for me. One thing that was interesting was there is an essay by Ross Isaacs, or perhaps it's Ross Isaacs, apology to Ross. This is an essay on symbols and how they connect in a very tangible way to the foci used by mages in game sessions. And this was interesting, talking about symbols. But one thing that it would have benefited from is the fact that for many mages, learning magic is the ultimate cross-cultural experience, because a lot of mages come into a group and they learn a paradigm that belongs to either a different part of the world or even the same part of a world, but like 600 years in the past. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times they are picking up the symbols and cultural assumptions from a culture that is not their own. In Ross's essay here, he just kind of assumes that mages are learning the symbols and working with the cultural assumptions of their own culture. So I thought that was worth adding. But basically, the essays in Chapter 6, I guess they're nice enough, but there was nothing really attention-grabbing for me.
I don't know that there was anything particularly groundbreaking for me. To kind of bleed into my thoughts on the book as a whole is, even if this is not something that has the latest advice, if you are a big fan of Mage and the history of RPGs, this is certainly a good time capsule, where it's kind of interesting that it talks about, like, make sure it's okay with everyone if you introduce a gay character. And my immediate thought is, it is 2020. And then my second immediate thought is, no, it's not. It's 1997. This was probably being written in 1996. Boy, howdy, have the times changed over my own lifetime. And it talks about methods for dealing with people's boyfriends and girlfriends or partners, how to introduce romance into a game in a short section. And that is something where what started as a 3-paragraph thing here, you can now get entire RPGs on courtly romance. So if you want to play Blue Age by Green Ronin, you can, and do nothing but have courtly romance. It talks about, I think the most terrifying section of the book outside of the Nefandi is where it talks about guest storytellers. You can run my chronicle when you pry it from my cold dead hands. And then we get James Estes' essay on the notion of what it is to be a hero, how that can inform us, and how we can all be heroes in our everyday life, and so on. And then we get Appendices, where it does a quick reference to a whole bunch of stuff. And I didn't find anything particularly useful, but again, this is a 23-year-old book, and we while we can talk about it in terms of the history of Mage, this is a case where I don't think there's a huge amount of information that we can take. But as you pointed out, the Ross Isaacs essay is pretty interesting, and it talks about consistent themes across magic. One is the idea that like affects like, that if you want to change something in the world, you have something similar to it that you want to do. And if you don't want something to happen, there are things that look like other things, and that idea is taboo and that we need to avoid it. The second principle is that of contact, that items that have touched or been in contact, even once great distance separates them, still has some useful effect. And this is like the early seeds of a lot of the paradigm theory that will explode in M20 as we get page after page of paradigm and idea, and also to kind of explain the idea behind the connection aspect of the sphere of correspondence. And in this section, you can see a lot of nascent seeds to things that will be better developed later. Still a fascinating look about things, but don't feel bad if you look at this and go, this really isn't doing it for me. I'm going to skip on to something else.
Yeah. To sum up, if someone was going to say, do you recommend this book to Mage players? I would say if you're playing Revised or M20, you can do without this book. I think buying a less expensive PDF and reading just the section in Chapter 3 on the Technocracy has some value for every Mage Storyteller. I think it's great. But overall, you really can do without this book. If you're running a first or second edition, this book has more use to you. I think the reference information at the very back can be quite useful. But honestly, even if you're running second edition, you can do without this book. You're going to be okay.
This is, again, one of those cases where we're not saying it was bad. At its time, it was quite useful and put a bunch of stuff together. But the RPG world has advanced. You can get a lot of the information that you would need from this in either a newer copy of the Mage Core rulebook and a lot of the storyteller advice that you can get, or information on contemporary gaming and how the landscape has changed. Other people have chronicled that elsewhere, and I will try to include a few of those links in our show notes just in case you are curious. Some people that I think have done a particularly good job helping you storytell. And the advent of the live play as a phenomenon where you can literally watch someone else run a game. I find most of them dull as dirt, but still I find it useful sometimes to look at another storyteller and see what techniques they are using, and not necessarily strictly reading it in a flat text where someone describes what they're doing. So yeah, those are kind of my summary on things.
Nowadays, you just get on the internet and you look at RPG blogs, and not even for World of Darkness stuff. You can go to like fantasy role-playing game RPG blogs, and they've got really great free blog posts on how do you prep for a game, how do you get started as a game master, how do you manage difficult players, what if my player does this, how do I respond? There's like really great stuff out on the blogs now. But yeah, the book was written back in 1997, and the internet was quite different then.
Yeah, most people don't realize that blog comes from weblog, which is itself an abbreviation, web from World Wide Web, and log, because on the early internet you would literally write things into piece of narrowly hewn wood and send them back and forth over the nascent tubes that formed the internet. Most people don't know that. You heard it here first. So
yeah, that's a little extra trivia for you there.
But I was glad to notice that on page 10 that we got a canon answer to, is this game hard? And it said, Mage looks like an intimidating game to run. The sheer complexity of the setting, the esoteric nature of the subjects, and potential for rules abuse make the bravest storyteller cringe at the thought of running an extended Mage Chronicle. It doesn't have to be that way, really. Mage is, at heart, a simple game. Turns out you and I have been making this far too complicated for all this time. So,
yeah, I guess we kind of look silly now. It's like at heart, it's a simple game. And here Terry and I are going online saying, let us give you advice on how to run this game. Yeah. Well, no disrespect was intended, folks. We're only trying to help.
Yeah. And there I will point out that while Mage may be simple, it is not necessarily easy. And do not confuse the two.
Yes, definitely. Good point. Well, I think that just about wraps up our look for Tomes of Magic at the Book of Mirrors for second edition. If you have something to say, please contact us at magethepodcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. Subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and TuneIn, and others. If you like the show, others might like it too. And if you leave a review of Mage the Podcast, it makes us more visible in other people's searches. You can follow us on Twitter at Mage the Podcast. We're also on the web at magethepodcast.com. You can listen to past episodes there and see our complete show notes. This episode is thanks to executive producers Ira Grace, Richard Bat Brewster, and Michael Parker. If you would like to become an executive producer for Mage the Podcast, it would help us keep producing episodes. You would also become a part of our own council to discuss upcoming projects. The link in the show notes will get you started. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Until next time, truth until paradox, baby.
Next, we get to talk about the Order of Hermes tradition book, the last tradition book that we get to do in 2E. After that, the Syndicate, and then we're done the Splat books.
That is definitely the case. Last of those Splat books.
And with that, bye.